good shape again.
I think
You have absolutely inspired me, Chris.
I have?
Yeah.
Kristen?
You're always really good about working out and staying active and all of that. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to make a really I'm like, at my age, if I don't get back into shape now and commit to staying, not as a do it and drop it and do it and drop it, but commit to this is part of my lifestyle now. I think it'll go to, this is the time to really do it. And I want to commit to being in like the best shape of my life now.
Well, I appreciate it, but I will say that, I have an easier time because I don't have the family obligations that both of you do and the children and all those things that suck a huge amount of time. So while I appreciate it, I do understand that I have a little more flexibility, but it is still a discipline thing. I mean, it doesn't matter how much time you have. You still have to say, I'm dedicating this 90 minutes to working out. Whether you have the time, whether, you have the flexibility like I do, there's a lot of people that choose not to. So I
fit it in where I can. I fit it in where I can because I sincerely, actually, a lot of times don't have the time. Like sincerely, like sun up to sundown between everything, don't have the time. So I try. I mean, I don't always get to it, but I watch what I eat. I'm trying to stay healthy.
For me, honestly, sometimes it's I have 5 minutes and I'll do 15, 25, 30 push-ups and I'll go keep doing what I was doing. I'll literally do squats while I'm brushing my teeth if that's what it is. It's fitting. I mean, honestly, though,
you can drop back at the bathroom. You have pants on when you do that.
That's not your concern. Hey, Doreen from Tampa Bay. Hey, Melinda. Our studio audience is filling in over on YouTube, so I just wanted to say a quick hello before we get started with today's episode.
Hey, everybody. We're just talking about John's gym videos that you might have been seeing on his page. And if you're not following him, you should at Gen X Jono. You should definitely be following him, and you'll get all these gym videos of him with his tank top on that says "Sun's out, guns out," and posing in the mirror and flexing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and by all that kind of stuff, we mean none of that stuff. Well, listen, we have our studio audience. We have the three of us, so I figure we can just go ahead and get started and welcome. Oh, Melinda, I am not transferring that over to the podcast. That does not need to show on the screen.
You're not putting that on the screen?
Oh,
of course I'm putting it on the screen. Of course I'm putting it on the screen.
With a toothbrush in his mouth.
Silly people thinking for a minute I wouldn't put that.
I do the same thing when I'm doing with coffee or wherever I'm standing, I'm cooking. Then I'll do something like push-ups against the countertop if I'm standing.
Yeah, that works.
Whatever it takes.
So I would like to formally welcome everybody, both in our studio audience and those watching it on replay, to the Three View Mirror podcast. Once again, coming to you live or in replay and discussing three different topics from generally three different eras that us Gen Xers grew up in: 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And as always, the host has a secret hidden message, a hidden connection between the three topics they've brought up. And today's host is Chris Clues.
Hey, everybody. I want to say hey to Luna in North Carolina because I actually went to college there at Elon. I don't know where you are in North Carolina, but I went to Elon, was college, now Elon University, way back in the day. Yes, and I'm Chris Clues, just Chris Clues, keynote speaker and author. You guys want to introduce yourselves and we'll go ahead and get started?
And I'm Rochelle O'Black, known as Gen X Shell online. So, and like Chris said, follow Gen X Jono and follow Gen X Shell.
And you can find me pretty much anywhere online under Gen X Jono. And this is the Three View Mirror podcast. Back to you, Chris.
That's our song. Okay, so my three topics today, I hopefully are familiar to everyone who is on the podcast today. And those three topics are The Breakfast Club, James Bond, and Milli Vanilli.
Love those topics. Love those topics, dude. Absolutely love those topics.
I think they're pretty broad, and hopefully everybody can contribute here. Everybody in the chat as well. If you haven't seen The Breakfast Club, well, blasphemy. I mean, come on. Like, I hope you've seen it. This is not Fast Times at Ridgemont High that John hasn't seen.
Or Ghost, which you haven't seen.
No, I haven't seen Dirty Dancing.
Close enough.
My heart.
I put baby in the corner and I left her there. That's where she's staying. Yeah.
We need a watch party for that. I mean, we seriously need a watch party for that. Patrick Swayze shirtless in a love scene. I mean, come on. I'm sorry. That's not for you. That's for me.
Demi Moore.
John's watching that when he's doing his squats with his toothbrush in the bathroom.
Or Melinda says beaches. We could always have a watch party for beaches. I'm good for that, as long as And again, the movie was never my favorite thing. The movie I was dragged to, and I couldn't believe that women would subject themselves to a movie that could make you that sad. It's the song from Beaches that I once admitted to kind of sort of liking and singing when nobody sees me.
Mm-hmm.
When beneath my wings. It was beautiful.
Yeah. No,
Kristen,
see those opening credits and you're just tearing up already.
It's horrible.
If Kristen said if it's a Chris one, I'm going to give up before we even start. I'll tell you what, I think this one, I will say the connection could be a couple of different things. So you may have a pretty good shot at this one. And if not, they're three fun topics.
Absolutely.
So, all right.
Yeah, I'm at a loss to begin with. I will say that. I don't see anything jumping out at me right away. But even without getting it, these are three topics I can't wait to get into.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put in the chat just for anybody that comes in late. The three topics are The Breakfast Club, for those of you that just maybe came in, James Bond, and and Milli Vanilli, which I'm probably going to
extra bonus points if you can spell Milli Vanilli.
I probably spelled it wrong.
No, you didn't.
Well, that's probably because I was doing a bunch of posts last year saying that now that Auto-Tune won a Grammy, I feel like Milli Vanilli, I feel like the Grammys should give them their Grammy back at this point. They were just
they can only give it back to one of them.
Well, I think
the other one died. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but I think the other one might have passed as well. I'm not really sure.
Maybe.
But they should posthumously, how do you say that? After death?
Posthumously.
Posthumously. They should get their Grammy back at this point because all they were doing 35 years ago is what everybody's doing today.
Yeah.
So,
again, you and I disagree a little bit on that because I don't think today we know it. It's obvious. I can hear auto-tune when I hear it. I know that it's a thing. They were subverting the fact that it wasn't them singing. So I totally get your point. And every time you bring it up, we kind of marginally disagree a little bit. I wouldn't give them back the Grammy, but at the same time, I never would have given Auto-Tune a Grammy either. So I guess there's that.
Well, we're going to dive into that. That will be our final topic.
Okay.
So our first topic, you can see on my chalkboard here. If you can see that, if you're watching on YouTube, sincerely yours, The Breakfast Club, which also happens to be here. Sincerely yours, The Breakfast Club. So now you know I'm a fan of the movie. All right. No. So let's jump. No, not at all. Not at all.
Not John Hughes, not them teen movies. Chris has never been a fan of those. We've never heard that before.
Never. Yeah.
Never.
It's just a movie I don't know. I just missed it. I wasn't a real big fan. I watched it once. What is your first your first impression when you hear the words The Breakfast Club?
Well, for me, The Breakfast Club was, I think, the reason that it's so popular, so enduring. And I read that it made it on like the National Registry of Films, I think, as an important piece of American history and film history. For me, it was an exact replica of what high school was like at that time, with the cliques and the stereotypical the beauty and the nerd and the jock and the rebel. It was everything that we knew every one of them, and we knew them before just by looking at them, we could pick them out of a crowd into what clique they belong to.
So for me, it is exactly that. And it's the line, I think it was Emilio Estevez's character that says it. And when they write it in the story, I think he's the one talking about it. When they write it in the letter, we are all the jock, we are all the brain, we are all the... That really resonated with me then. And it still resonates with me now. Because I think in high school, we had a tendency to box ourselves into a certain niche, a certain clique, a certain persona, and that's who we were. And seeing this movie and a lot of other movies like it in the early 80s, 83, 84, 85, those movies kind of taught us that we're not as different as we thought we were from the people we wanted to most be like. If you were a brainy nerd, you wanted to be like the jocks because you thought they had it easy. They had the perfect life. If you were the jock, you might have wanted to be more like the nerd who sailed through classes and had no problem with homework and figured they had it easy. The rich kid, the poor kid, we all thought somebody else had it easy. And this movie and movies like it, I will say, were more than just entertainment. It really did bring it home a little bit and spoke to us when we were that age in a way that I hope movies still do today, but I don't think they do.
Yeah. But can I just point out really quickly, Melinda has a zinger on here that she's surprised I don't have Judd Nelson tattooed on me. I actually do have that as a lower back tattoo. So I have Judd Nelson.
You have a tramp stamp
of Judd Nelson.
No, you have a tramp stamp
I'm
of Judd Nelson.
I'm kidding. I don't. No. I'm kidding. Wow. No, I do not.
I'm going to go back to editing these, and I'm going to make a clip with that, and then I'm going to find an image somewhere. And before I'm done,
somebody out there has a tramp stamp of Judd Nelson.
Oh, I'm sure if I go looking, I'll find one.
Yeah, there's
without a doubt.
But it's not me.
There you go. There's your Google homework for the night for the audience, is to go find a picture of a Judd Nelson tramp stamp.
And superimpose it on an image of Chris Clues.
Yes.
Awesome. Can't wait to see it. I'll use it in my next keynote. All right.
There we go.
So, Rochelle.
Melinda makes a good point, too, and she says that it captured middle-class America.
Yeah.
Which I guess I could see that. There's been some commentary about the fact that diversity is lacking, whether it's socioeconomic or racial diversity in the movie. And people that spoke up for the movie said, hold on a second. It wasn't pretending to be anything that it wasn't. It absolutely was a suburban, middle to upper class neighborhood in Chicago, which is where John Hughes grew up. And that's what it was speaking to. That's what this movie was. Unapologetically, it wasn't pretending to be anything else. So I don't see that as a problem. It's the movie that they chose to make. You can choose to make another one, whether Spike Lee's movies or anybody's. You make the movie you choose to make. And I don't think that in and of itself is or ever should be problematic.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. What I was going to tell you, Chris, was one of the things I loved about the movie, though, and even though it talked about this little microcosm of life back then, one of the things I've enjoyed most about being an actual adult, which is, on a good day, okay, an actual adult, is that you don't any longer see people in those pockets anymore, that it is purely almost like a high school, maybe into college thing. And yeah, there's still, some bits of socioeconomic differences and things, but generally a nicely evolved human being would look at another one and know that no matter where they're at as a young adult, we start to look at people differently. And I think that this helped. I don't know that this movie helped, but growing up after high school, we learned that, maybe the jock was getting beat like Judd Nelson was getting beat, or, and the nerd was having trouble with this. And we see every bit of every person in everyone that we meet, and we give everyone a chance. At least I know I do.
Yeah. And I think that point helps with mine, which is, the diversity was really in the personalities of the characters, the athlete, the brain, the jock, the princess, and the basket case. Mm-hmm. That's where the diversity was, because you can take those 5 personalities or those 5 characters and you can put them in any place, at least in the country and probably in the world, when it comes to a high school. Mm-hmm. It could be in the suburbs. It could be in the inner city. It could be in the South, the North, the West, the East. It doesn't really matter where you go. You are going to have those 5 characters represented. And I think that's, for me, where the diversity came from, and that so many people, even people who, don't look like Molly Ringwald or Judd Nelson, can see themselves in those characters. And I know, because I talk about this movie a lot. I talk about it a lot in the keynotes that I do when I'm talking to lots of different people. And the diversity of people come up to me to talk about the idea of those characters and seeing themselves in them when they were kids, or seeing their kids in those characters. It's pretty wild that the group of people who actually say, I could see myself as that person. And Michelle commented that I was a combo of all except the princess. And I do believe that. I think that so many of us could say, maybe some of us over our lifetime, maybe some of us every day, are a piece of each one of those at some point. Regardless of whether we're male or female, we can all be a princess at some points in our lives. I'm sure, Michelle, at one moment in your life, somebody would have said you were a princess in that moment. I know, I'm sure I was the princess, the basket case, the jock, the criminal, and the athlete, the criminal, and the brain, and probably every day. Mm-hmm.
So what about the other aspects of the film that now coming out? Molly Ringwald herself spoke out against it and then backpedaled it a little because she got a little bit of heat, because I think people were they were putting in too much of an emphasis on what she said. But like the scene where Judd Nelson is underneath the desk looking up her skirt. Now, in the movie itself, because of the physical age difference of the actors, that wasn't Molly Ringwald. That was a different actor that subbed in for that scene. So they were conscious of the fact that these were 2 real people, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't do anything in that moment that we're taking a minor and putting the minor, Molly Ringwald, in an uncomfortable situation. That was high school. Those things happened. Not to a Porky's level, peering into the girls' locker room through a whole thing, but where Porky's overemphasized that sort of behavior, I think this kind of nailed it. I think the guys trying to look under a girl's skirt, inappropriate. I'm not saying it's not, but it happened, and it was a thing in the time. Snapping girls' bra straps was a thing. It shouldn't have been, but it was. And I think it was a true representation, so that we can see it, we can acknowledge it, and hopefully we can evolve past it. But it's because of those things that we were there then, and we are hopefully here now, that I like it in the movie. It allows us to see how hopefully we haven't stayed static as a civilization, that we grow.
Mm-hmm. And I think we'd be remiss in this if we did not bring up Principal Vernon here for a moment. And anybody that was in a live, like it was way back. We talked about Principal Vernon. We each had opinions on Principal Vernon. And I would just love for Chris to reiterate his opinions on Principal Vernon, because he's very wise and knowledgeable in this movie.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad we're kind of shifting gears over to other parts of the movie and Principal Vernon, because I've said, and I got a lot of heat in one of the lives, one of John's lives, about how I loathed Principal Vernon as a kid, as most of us did, and I compared him the same to Mr. Hand in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, if you've ever seen that movie. And then reflecting back on it as an adult, all I said was, hey, listen, Principal Vernon, if you really look at it from the adult perspective and you listen to what he was saying to Bender, and I'm not talking about the other kids, but Bender, he was really saying, instead of going to prison, you'll just come here. And what did Bender always say about his life? His father sucked. His father beat him. I think Michelle brought that up earlier. He burns him with cigarettes. Mm-hmm. And here he is getting in all this trouble and lashing out. And Principal Vernon is the only kind of man in his life who's saying, I'm going to discipline you, but I'm going to do it in a way that's not how his father was doing it. And I'm doing it because you're going to come here instead of prison. And so I said, I actually appreciate Principal Vernon as an adult in the same way that I appreciate Mr. Hand as the American history teacher in Fast Times, because as you grow, you realize like all he was really trying to do is help his kids learn and graduate.
See, and even way back then when I was watching the movie, I had no hate for Principal Vernon because for me, he was simply the authority figure that we all grew up knowing that, you know, you have this hard-edged, hard-ass teacher who's really trying. They're not actually trying to be, you know, what with the bull with the horns, you're going to get the horns or whatever it is he says there. You know, he was trying in his best way, right, to teach these kids, and it was how we were taught back then. It was a little bit of tough love. It wasn't very soft. I mean, nobody gently, not nobody, but I mean, we weren't very gently parented, you know, kind of like kids are now. It was a tougher parenting style, and teachers were a substitute parent. And we're not talking about, you know, Bender's type of tough parent. That wasn't love. That was just tough. With the teachers represented a tough love for us. And so I agree with you. I think he is a great figure in that. He's doing his job. He's trying to save kids.
He was a dick. I couldn't stand him. He abused his authority. He got off on it. He was a little man who had little control in his little life and decided to be the tough guy when dealing with kids.
And
Vernon was a dick.
And everybody has their opinion, even the guy who does squats while he's brushing his teeth.
There you go. Tramp stamp.
Hey, before I do want to bring up, because we could talk all day about Breakfast Club, but there are three things I want to kind of bring up outside of this conversation about the characters. But one is that the movie was made for $1 million. $1 million. And he couldn't even get investors at the time, John Hughes, because he was new to directing. In fact, you know, he had done a little bit before The Breakfast Club, but at the time that he was getting ready to direct The Breakfast Club, it was supposed to be his first directorial or his debut as a director. And nobody really wanted to invest even $1 million in the movie. And he said, look, I'll just shoot it on one location, one room, and we'll do this thing. And so thankfully somebody agreed. The second thing I want to bring up, and this is for all of us out there, you know, we watch the Rotten Tomatoes, and we see, like, a lot of times the critics, the Rotten Tomatoes score is 20%, and for the people it's 95. It was no different back then. If you read some of the reviews of The Breakfast Club, you have to laugh, because the main reviewer for Variety, which was a huge magazine back in the day, said it'll probably pass as deeply profound among today's teenage audience, meaning the youngsters in the film spend most of their time talking to each other instead of dancing, dropping the drawers, and throwing food. This, on the other hand, should not suggest that they have anything intelligent to say. Somebody else in the New York Times, a critic, said there's good actors in here, but he put them all together, simply flung them together, and really should have just left well enough alone. And many others basically said it's just generic. It's not going to last the test. It's not going to make the test of time, and people will forget about the movie. So all of that is to say that, you know, when you see the critics saying something's bad, it's probably good. I think we've all realized that by now.
Well, the movie wasn't trying to speak to them. I think that just says everything we need to say about this movie. They weren't the intended audience, so fine. Who cares if they got it? We were the intended audience, and we got it.
Yeah.
Well, I think for them to say that it wouldn't pass the test, would be forgotten. It's shocking to think that, like, you have The Breakfast Club. And I want to point out one more thing about it. John Hughes, before we move on, was a master of music. He loved music in his movies. And if you've read about John Hughes, he really did a lot of the music selection for the vast majority of his movies, particularly when it was a song that meant something really important or was at an important moment. For example, the song that's playing at the end of Planes, Trains, Automobiles. But also, of course, Don't You Forget About Me. Simple Minds is just it's a Gen X anthem. And we have John Hughes to thank for so much of the music that we consumed back then, and I think still appreciate today.
Oh, can I say one profound thing about Don't You Forget About Me? Because I absolutely love that song. I think in picking that song, if I could be in John Hughes's mind, he was saying to the teenagers to not forget, don't forget who you are, but also don't forget who everyone else is around you. Don't forget about me as you grow up. Don't forget that you were a part princess, were a part brave, were a part geek or a jock, Don't forget for the rest of your life that we're all the same.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll add is I I always think that a movie always has 2 or 3 movies in it that aren't seen, right? That the after, the before, the during. And it Don't You Forget About Me, I think also plays into don't forget about them. I don't think, just knowing what high school was like when we were kids, yeah, it would be great if they stayed really good friends, and if Emilio Estevez and it's, still hanging out within a week, they were passing each other in the hallways and not even nodding. Maybe they'd give a little head nod. But high school being what high school was, that was it. That's the way it was.
Mhm.
And it's a hard lesson to take, but that's what life was like in high school. So I like that. You could tell that Brian sensed it. Brian, Anthony Michaels Hall character, almost came out, you won't acknowledge me in the hallways. Today, yeah, you're talking to me, Claire. Today, yeah, you guys are seeing me here, but you won't tomorrow. And the fact is, they probably did forget about them, or at least publicly wouldn't acknowledge that they remembered them, because that's what it was like.
Peer pressure was incredible.
Incredible.
Because, yeah, and you were stuck in your role, but somewhere inside you knew that you were just like them, and that's why I said going into adulthood, you learned a lot more, that life is not like high school.
It's amazing how many friends that I have today from high school that still keep in touch with me that I didn't think really knew who I was, or really, and a lot of it's in our own heads. I have people that have really fond memories of me that they're like, oh my God, we were great friends. And I'm like, really? Because I get in my own head.
Yeah. Well, I tell people that, a lot of times when I run into younger people that may have heard of the Breakfast Club but haven't seen it, I tell them they should watch it. But I say, at the very least, go on YouTube and find the scene, because it's easy to find, the 6 minutes where they're sitting in the back of the library and they're doing exactly what Shell was talking about this idea of who they are and why they're there, how they ended up there. And, with, Ali Sheedy saying, I just didn't have anything better to do, so, but you get to really understand them and their challenges, and you can see yourself in all of them at that moment. Brian's a great example of that, and what happened with him with the flare gun that he brought to school. And it's a pretty incredible exchange. It shows the depth of how good each of these actors and actresses really were in their prime. They were amazing. And I'll say one other thing, just to go back to Shell and John as we wrap up. It's that, what we learned from this really is that the people are like the ocean. You got to get below the surface to see the really cool stuff. And the deeper you go, the cooler the stuff is. And that's really what they did. They just kept getting deeper and deeper under the layers of what they only saw walking down the hall when they walked on by. So there's your lesson.
I love it.
All right.
I love it. That was a great talk, by the way, about just an absolutely flowing talk between friends here about that movie. Amazing.
Yeah. I love it.
Who would you have been? Were you Claire?
What do you think?
I'm talking to Chris.
Was I Claire? You looked like you went from Brian to Bender in a year with your pictures.
Kind of, sort of, yeah. That was me.
Yeah, you were Brian, then you were Bender within 12 months.
Within 12 months. Hormones kicked in. There was a big change for me.
I was a highly nerdy princess. That's who I probably would have pegged myself as.
I was a combination of the athlete and the brain.
Yeah, that was me too, honestly. I didn't have any of Bender's issues or, fighting, but I looked a little more like him. But that was different. All right, we are way over time, but that's okay. We'll probably make it up.
Yes, we will. All right, so let's move on. We're going to shift gears here, and we're going to talk about a classic character, that's known around the world, James Bond, 007. And even if you haven't seen any James Bond movies, it would be tough to at least not know the name James Bond, or at least have heard 007. Mm-hmm. Been around for a long time. So first thoughts when I say James Bond.
I loved the movies when I was a kid. I absolutely, they were like the Saturday, like Sunday mornings or something. Like I can remember watching them on regular TV. This wasn't like we went and rented a James Bond movie. They were shown all the time.
I loved them. I remember getting excited every time a new James Bond movie came out. And I seem to recall in the 80s, there was one particular summer where Sean Connery and Roger Moore both had a James Bond movie coming out in the same summer. I think and I thought that was super cool to see them both playing the same character the same summer, 2 different movies. Sean Connery was probably my favorite 007, but him and Roger Moore are probably the 2 that I most associate with because they're the ones I watched growing up.
Yeah.
Pierce Brosnan, I thought, did a pretty good job in the more, later years. But between Roger Moore and Sean Connery, it's almost blasphemy to say I liked Roger Moore more because it's Sean Connery. I mean, you can't almost he's Sean Connery. But
I think it was just a different James Bond. Roger Moore was the more classy, played it in that role. And Sean Connery was the tougher, grittier. I don't think that's blasphemy at all. I just think you prefer one way. They didn't both play the same character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and James Bond has evolved over the years. In fact, the first story was written by Ian Fleming in 1953, and it was Casino Royale. Now, doing the research, I didn't realize that Ian Fleming died in 1964. So there have been 8 other James Bond authors since then, but he wrote a lot of the stories in that short time frame. And we even had a guy who was James Bond for one movie, George Lazenby, who was, I believe, Bond in Casino Royale. So he was just one. And I agree. Like, I was a huge Sean Connery fan. I was a huge James Bond fan. I thought I was James Bond when I was a kid. It was one of those things that just, I thought that I could come up with all kinds of things like Q created for him, like the pen that shoots stuff and whatever it was. Like, I wanted to have those things. And I'm sure that at some point I went to, some James Bond store and bought some ridiculous thing that I thought made me like him, but I was nowhere near as cool.
All right. So I don't want to get us banned here.
What's that?
I said, I don't want to get us banned here, but as a kid, there were 2 favorite characters I had in Bond movies that weren't James Bond. And one was Jaws. I cannot remember the movie, which one it was. Absolutely loved the Jaws character. He was like 7 foot tall.
Goldfinger? I think it was Goldfinger. I think
it might have been Goldfinger.
Yeah. And then the other thing was, I can remember, I think it was a Sean Connery version where the Bond girl was named Pussy Galore. I'm like, I can't get myself banned here, but like
they all had those names.
Huh?
They all had those names. I mean, there was even the movie Octopussy.
Yeah.
What was it?
Octopussy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was what's his name I made fun of with Mike Myers, the Mike Myers movies in the late 90s that I wish they would have done more of. The 2, somebody in the chat, I'm like having a brain freeze. The Austin Powers.
Austin. Oh yeah.
I mean, made fun of all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So there were a couple other notable Bond girls: Honey Rider, Kissy Suzuki, and not to be overdone, Holly Goodhead.
Okay, see, I did not know that. I may have to use that in somewhere, somehow in life and make a joke about it. But all I remembered was Pussy Galore. That's all I remembered. That's the only one.
Holly Goodhead.
Holly Goodhead. Holy.
Now,
switching gears for a minute, since we just mentioned Ian Fleming, I also want to mention that Ian Fleming wrote a ton of these James Bond books, and he only wrote a couple other things of note that weren't James Bond. The only one I know of was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Oh, I did not know that.
I did not.
So if you grew up like me watching Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and really loving that as well, you have the same guy to thank for that as you do 007 with a License to Kill.
Wait, I sing on every episode, so bang bang, chitty chitty bang,
chitty bang bang, chitty chitty bang bang, we love you. Hi, Chitty, low Chitty, everywhere you go, Chitty.
What is
happening? I love that show. So
I did too.
Scared the hell out of me. The child napper, holy moly. Holly Goodhead, did he scare the crap out of me?
return.
It always does.
Coming back, I do want to mention, though, because with the Breakfast Club, we talked about how it has a staying power. And even today, there are kids in high school who are watching that movie and embracing it and enjoying it. And James Bond is no different, because most of you in the chat, and Sean Connery, Sean Connery was James Bond from 62 to 67 and then in 1971. And it feels like he was James Bond 15 years ago. Like, it doesn't, when you think about those movies, most of the movies he was in came out before any of us were born.
Well, like I said, there was the one he did in the 80s. I don't remember which that was. He was an old James Bond at that point.
But he wasn't the main, because Roger Moore was the main James Bond in the 80s.
But like I said, they both came out. He revisited the role. They hired him to be James Bond. I got to see which movie it was.
Are you sure? Because
Positive.
The last one I had him in was 1971, Diamonds Are Forever.
I say I'm positive, but you know how that goes.
When I said Pierce Brosnan, was I not right that I distinctly remember Pierce Brosnan as a
I know Pierce Brosnan wanted to be. He was later. So
Yeah.
Pierce Brosnan was supposed to be at much earlier than he was.
Okay.
Remington Steele producers, they would not let him out of his contract.
Gotcha.
So he missed the opportunity to jump in right after Roger Moore. And then he didn't become him until much later on.
Interesting. Thank you for that. I had no idea.
And I made a mistake earlier that George Lazenby, who was
Never Say Never Again, 1983, was Sean Connery as James Bond.
You said you made a mistake, Chris?
I made a mistake earlier. George Lazenby was actually on Her Majesty's Secret Service. That was the
That's right.
only one that he was the James Bond. But it does speak to the power of the character and of Sean Connery, that he did the most of them before we were even alive. And if you ask people James Bond in our age group, it's Sean Connery for most, not all, but for most. And I find that shows the power of the James Bond character, that we would relate a character in the 60s to, when we were kids. But he really wasn't doing it. It was Roger Moore.
Shaken, not stirred.
Do that again.
Shaken, not stirred.
Which actually, as the bartender in the group, actually dilutes a martini. Shaking a martini infuses it with a lot of water because you're forcing the ice to melt. So it makes it weaker. So I always thought it was strange that James Bond, super tough guy, would want his martini shaken, not stirred. I would figure he would have been more like, I'll take it lukewarm and stirred. I'm good.
Yeah, he would have like the pinky off the glass. Like, I think he would want a bourbon neat. Like,
there
that
you
would
go.
be like more of a.
Could Sean Connery or even Roger Moore, who you might think Roger Moore was the kinder, gentler James Bond, but both of these guys, the misogyny was huge in all of these movies. Huge.
Holly Goodhead.
Well, but even the fact that you couldn't be a female in a James Bond movie and have him not sleep with you or try to sleep with you. I think Her Majesty. What's that?
Or be half naked.
Or be half naked.
Yeah.
The misogyny was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And again, we talk about, does that mean there's no value to it today? I say no, there's perfectly good value in it. You can still watch the movie and enjoy it and say that if it were going to be made today, it would be different.
Maybe not for the best.
Well, they are different now with the
View
ones that
to
they
a
paid.
Oh, you know what? Wait, somebody said View to a Kill. I completely forgot about that song. I remember that version.
Duran
that
Duran.
song.
Great video. Great
Yes.
video. They were playing the agents. I can see them right now,
Yes.
going through.
Yes.
Yeah, and that
Great
was Duran
ad, Michelle.
Duran.
Thank you.
Right?
I said great ad, Michelle. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that was Duran Duran, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, the music for those movies too. How many now I'm like on a roll. Like, I want to know like who actually sang or performed each of these songs, because they do.
Oh, there were a lot.
So,
the same
I'm
year
looking
that
up,
Duran Duran did View to a Kill, Sheena Easton did For Your Eyes Only in the Roger Moore movie For Your Eyes Only that came out. And that was a huge title song for her.
You've got Tom Jones, Nancy Sinatra, Paul McCartney and the Wings did Live and Let Die originally in 73.
Yeah.
Carly
I
Simon,
love that one. Yeah.
Duran Duran, Aha did The Living Daylights. Gladys Knight, Tina Turner, Sheryl Crow, Garbage, Madonna, Chris Cornell, Jack White and Alicia Keys, Adele, Billie Eilish, and then Hans Zimmer composed composed one. Marvin Hamlish composed one. Bill Conti. I mean, that's pretty cool. You think about the impact that the music had as well on James Bond movies and also on popular culture.
I can still sing in my head the theme song though too. You know, that slow where you saw the 007 and the gun went through the 07. Yeah. And this wasn't the 7 a gun always?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the blood fills when they get him in the target, it comes down red. It was very iconic. That's a word we use from time to time. And 007, James Bond, Q, M, the toys, the cars. You know, the car companies would fight over who got to have the movie placement of being the car in the James Bond movie. It was a huge deal to be a Bond girl, to be a Bond car, to any and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a huge deal. It would change people's, trajectory in terms of their career. And now they're talking about, there hasn't been a James Bond, I think, in a couple of years. And, what's his name, who's doing it now, is not interested in continuing, I don't think. From what I've heard.
Daniel Craig? Was it still Daniel Craig?
Yeah, Daniel Craig. Yeah. So, but Idris Elba has been thrown around, which I think he would be an awesome James Bond. He would be really good. So I know they've narrowed it to a couple. That I saw an article the other day that there's like 3. He's one of the 3 that they're looking at.
Idris Elba would be fantastic.
He'd be awesome.
Yes.
He's James Bond.
What about a female James Bond? What about a female 007? Jane Bond. There was some talk about doing it.
I
mean, they could do it, but I don't know. I mean,
what would the guy's name be if it was Holly Goodhead? We could go with the guy name now. We could go so many places with that.
Clint Orris?
Oh no, here we go. Now it's going to be like that Seinfeld episode where you can't remember her name. It rhymes with a female body part. Mulva? No.
I attempted to get cunnilingus somehow into a name.
Dolores. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that there's been, I mean, it's not James Bond, of course, but there have been female characters that could have potentially been a character that they could have created a library of movies from. I think of the actress that I think of that had the potential to be like that was Angelina Jolie, because she did Tomb Raiders and then she did Salt. And if you haven't seen Salt, it's a great, there's another assassin movie that she did too, where they kind of bend the bullets.
With the guns. Yeah.
She would have been, I think, personally.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith too, though, no?
Did she do Mr. and Mrs. Smith?
Oh, yeah. That's how her and Brad got
That's
together.
where they met, and that's where she became a homewrecker.
That's right, yeah. I think she
License to Kill and Break Up Marriages.
Yeah.
She could have been a great, like they could have taken one of those characters potentially and turned it into something like that, because she had the acting chops, she had the look, she's, physical, she could do the physical stuff as well, the physical work as well, and believable. So
yeah,
I think they've tried. The Bourne Identity, was kind of a James Bondish type of thing.
Yeah,
that was
definitely. I like that.
I did too. Written in the late 60s as well, which is kind of interesting that so much of this was written back in the day and applied to
Cold War, it really started in that era. So there was a lot of espionage going on at that time. So I think it makes sense that it would have been then.
Mission Impossible. I mean, Mission Impossible was from then, and
Yeah, Queen Latifah, Melinda, in her earlier years, I think, could have definitely been a character that they could have turned into some kind of James Bond style-ish series. So when we go back to James Bond and the impact that the movies and the books and everything has had on pop culture, would we say that he is the most influential spy in pop culture ever?
Yeah.
I mean, is there anybody even close?
No, I think it's that.
Right.
Bourne Identity did all right. It's 007. Anytime you think of License to Kill, anytime you think of an agent, it's James Bond.
Yeah.
Or Inspector Gadget.
James Bond.
Inspector Gadget. Inspector Gadget. Yeah. I love Inspector Gadget.
I know.
Yeah. Go Gadget.
Melinda mentions Mission Impossible. So Tom Cruise had his stint there as well.
Yeah.
But the enduring, the time, so I always think of James Bond movies like a really good band, like a Van Halen. It doesn't matter who the front man is, the band can continue on.
Yeah.
Journey, you think Steve Perry. How can a band survive the loss of Steve Perry? Well, they're still making music today. The brand is bigger than the front man. And I think James Bond, to push the metaphor, fits into that same mold. The brand is bigger than any one person. Even when you have such iconic names as Sean Connery, the brand is bigger.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually a really good point. They have replaced the front man on multiple occasions, and yet it still works, and they're going to do it again.
Yeah.
And it's going to work.
Yeah.
And people just, they like the stories. I always thought the titles were just really, really cool. Like the titles got me. Like they got, when you see like Live and Let Die, A View to a Kill, The Spy Who Loved Me, Goldfinger, like they're just
Moonraker.
Moonraker. The names of the
That's
movies
with Jaws.
Yeah.
That's the one with Jaws.
That's the one with Jaws.
Oh, that's the one
I like the guy with the bowler cap that he could throw it and it like the really cool Bond villains.
Yeah.
Dr. No. There were the Bond girls. There was the Bond cars. There were the Bond toys. There were the Bond villains. They were components that made up a James Bond book and or movie. And it was incredible.
And the theme song.
And I don't know how that plays into Breakfast Club, nor God help me, Milli Vanilli.
Well, okay. So John, that's how John will transition us when he's like, we're going over time now. So that was the transition. So we are going to move on because we've had our last thoughts about James Bond. And I'm going to say that Idris, I always pronounce his name wrong, Elba is going to be the next James Bond. I hope that he is the next James Bond. Okay. So moving on. They'll have my money if they do. Let's talk about Milli Vanilli. First thoughts when I say Milli Vanilli.
Girl, you know it's true. Wait, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. Wait.
Well, you got to do the dance too. Oh, but you got to do the dance too. You got to do the whole like. Right? I mean, that's what they did. They went out.
That's what they did.
They went out. So it was like, I don't know. It's like, girl, you know it's true. Ooh, yeah. Yeah. First thoughts besides the lip syncing craziness around it.
I mean, that's fortunately the way that's it for me. That's it. It's all encompassing. Their issues became everything. Now, I don't know how much impact they may have had on the music itself. Okay, they weren't singing. Were they writers? Were they composers? Did they have anything? Or were they just faces? If they were just faces that somebody dropped in, then that's really unfortunate. I mean, but I don't know the backstory. I know the songs. I don't know what roles they played in creating those songs.
Yeah.
And
so,
go ahead.
Well, Blame It on the Rain, Baby Don't Forget My Number. Like they were, people remember Girl, You Know It's True, of course. And I remember because I was DJing in college and I always played Girl, You Know It's True and Blame It on the Rain. Almost every single time people would ask me to play it over. And the drunker they got, the more they wanted to hear it again and again and again and again. And that was the cassette singles, if you remember that. That's how we were able to like
singles.
Yeah, the singles. Yeah.
No, when you mentioned those songs though, I personally, and I have to say this out loud, I didn't really give two craps that they were lip syncing because to me, they were way too pop for me. I just didn't like the whole pop thing. Of course, I knew the songs. Of course, I liked some of the songs, but I wasn't into Milli Vanilli in any way, shape, or form. They reminded me a lot of, at the time, Boy George. It was, remember Boy George singing was repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was the same words throughout the entire song, and it felt very much.
How dare you?
I know. I'm comparing Milli Vanilli and Boy George to
Karma Chameleon?
Come, come. That's all he said. Come, Camellia.
You come and go. You come and go.
Yeah. They just said the same things over and over. And Milli Vanilli did that for me as well. And so I was not a fan. Fine, you lip sync. I didn't really give a crap, to be honest.
Yeah, and so for me, obviously, I mean, John and I have a healthy disagreement here over the auto tune and the lip sync, and whether, I've said before, and I said at the beginning of the show, I think they should get their Grammy back, considering that pretty much everybody today, or almost everyone, is lip syncing, and that some people have made an absolute career out of being terrible singers and great performers, and they only do studio stuff, and then they're lip syncing when they're live because they can't sing, but they can dance. And they're great performers, or they're beautiful, and they put all that package together, and it takes away from the people who actually are great performers. And back then, I will say, if I were to take John's side, I would say, well, Milli Vanilli came up right around New Edition, and they could all sing and perform. I mean, most of them went on to, solo careers after that. Boyz II Men was right around that time, I believe. I know I'm going to be missing some of these, some of the great kind of, groups that were being put in front of the Jackson 5. I mean, all of them, you could, some of them solo careers weren't as good as the others, but regardless, they could all sing. And so I could take John's side and say, well, these guys kind of deceived everybody and they weren't honest about who they were. So I see that side of it at the time.
I could meet you in the middle. I'd say give him back the Grammy, but also give a Grammy to the unknown members of the group that actually did the singing.
Yes, 100%.
I could meet you, then I would be fine with it because they all played a role that led to the success of the group.
Yeah.
Even the 90s, when we got into the 90s and early 2000s, groups that I didn't necessarily love personally, like Backstreet Boys or NSYNC, the talent, there was a direct shift to having talent. Whether you like the bubblegum pop genre itself, that's a debate to have, I guess. But they could see New Kids on the Block. They had strong voices. They needed to audition to be put together because these were produced groups. Even going into, One Direction in the 2000s. These were groups that were produced, and you needed to sing to make your way onto the group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed. And Doreen brought up no comparison to New Edition. I agree. I was not comparing them to New Edition. And Melinda brought up another bad creation, On the Playground. And Aisha and On the Playground are two of my favorite songs from back then, with another bad creation. And then New Edition, of course, Mr. Telephone Man, There's Something Wrong with My Line. I'm not comparing them at all, but making the point that there was talent then and that they were not singing, but they were great performers. They were great frontmen in terms of the look and the ability to move, because they could move as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to also talk a little bit about the idea of Milli Vanilli today. So we brought this up a little bit earlier. And if Milli Vanilli today, I assume they would be accepted, and they'd probably make it pretty clear that they're not singing, right? And as long as they were entertaining, would people care? Or what do you think would happen with that?
They would be auto-tuned. They would be singing. It's just
they'd have to sing. It would still have to be them. I can't think of a single star who's the face and somebody else is the voice. Mm-hmm. You can augment, alter, rearrange, studio effect the voice, but it still has to be them, and then you generate what you want out of it. I think that's the distinction. Today, you're right. Some people are singing and they don't have the voice you hear coming out of their head, but it's not somebody else's. It's a manufactured version of their own voice.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they could take it wasn't just they did sing. It wasn't this. I don't think this was ever supposed to be a permanent solution. The person that found them, and I think it was Melinda or Melissa, somebody mentioned that there is a documentary, and we have to watch it, that tells the story. But my understanding is somebody found them, packaged them, knew what he had, and go, these guys are going to be huge, but they just didn't speak English at the time. So this was a stopgap until he could get them to learn English. And they later on, after this debacle, they sang themselves. It's just they couldn't do it at the time.
And because they were from
Melinda says that's exactly it. Fab
Yeah.
Morvan could really sing, they just couldn't sing in English.
Right. They were German, and
yes,
I think it was Downtown Julie Brown said, "Wait a minute, you barely speak English, but you can sing like that," and it was like a clue that I think there might be something rotten in the state of Denmark here,
or in the state of Germany,
or in the state of Germany. Yeah.
But you also had, was it Nina, who also I think was German, who did 99? It was Nana Non Luftballon, and then she sang 99 Red Balloon. She never spoke a word of English either. She phonetically learned the English version of that song. So there was some precedent to it.
Yeah, I think there have been a couple artists that have done that don't actually speak the language and were able to sing. That it was easier, actually. I think I read that somewhere. That it was easier actually to sing in another language than it is to speak another language.
David Hasselhoff does that.
The Hofster. You gotta love the
Hoff. But they did actually, they sold 7 million records in the US and over 30 million internationally.
Yeah.
But if we go back to the 1988-89, that's an really impressive number.
Yeah.
So people enjoyed the music. It just wasn't them. And people enjoyed the performance. And again, like that's what I feel like so much of music is today. It's a performance. It's not now, setting aside the Lady Gagas and, some of the voices out there that are just like incredible. And you just listen to them, you're like, whoa, how does that come out of somebody who's in the same like human race as me and can get that kind of voice? It's spectacular. But there are a lot of people making millions and millions and millions of dollars today, and they're performers, which is fine. Okay. By the way, it's fine, but they're not singers. And that's, this, at least not being able to sing in English, those guys were not at the time.
It reminds me though, now it's not, I don't think it would have been as much of a big deal now, because now like the big giant scandal is to find out that Billie Eilish's hair wasn't actually dyed that, it was a wig, or that Kim Kardashian one day has hair this short, and the next day hair this short, 6 months later, and you're like, yeah, that's not possible. And then we catch them on those things, and it's such a short news story, but I still love Billie Eilish, or I still love Kim Kardashian. Back then there wasn't any spread of love for these poor guys, and I feel bad about that they were put in this situation, and they were just caught in the same situation a lot of people today are caught in. Oh no, I haven't had plastic surgery, or whatever.
Well, you don't even need the plastic surgery now. So now Melinda just mentioned AI instruments piss me off more than an AI voiceover. It's not even just that, but more and more, Shell and I do a lot of work online on platforms that put filters there for us to use that, Shell, you don't really use them unless if you're using it obviously as a joke. I don't use them. But there are people out there that, if God forbid you ever meet any of these influencers face to face, you may not recognize them. It's not even plastic surgery. It's pretend surgery. There's that one filter on TikTok that's, I can't even remember it, but it's a favorite of Gen Xers. It gives you like the square jawline, and it's amazing. And, you put that thing on yourself, you'll be like, holy moly. And then you turn it off, and you might have thought you looked decent before you put that filter on. I got to tell you, taking it off will make you feel pretty bad about yourself.
I can vouch for this because I'm on the dating apps, and I can vouch that the filters are being used and abused a lot more. Melinda mentioned Ozzy, and and I love Ozzy, by the way, and I just wanted to mention that because there's a great documentary called God Bless Ozzy Osbourne. And he has a pretty incredible story. So if you're an Ozzy fan, what's that?
Ozzy's a pretty cool.
Yeah. God Bless Ozzy Osbourne. And it tells his story. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So, okay. So we're at our hour now. So roughly, we have talked. Any more thoughts on Milli Vanilli? Okay. So we have talked about The Breakfast Club, James Bond, and Milli Vanilli. And now the question is, how do they connect?
Shell and I were having fun lip syncing to you talking.
Oh, is that what you guys were doing? I'm like, maybe nobody can hear me because we've had all the technical.
It took me a minute to catch on, and then I joined in.
I'm poking fun. I know it's not fair.
Oh no, I thought it was like you guys couldn't hear me because of the technical issues we have sometimes. Like,
no,
oh shit,
no. We were just.
So, Shell, what do you got? I'm looking away from chat for the moment because I don't want to cheat. I don't think I have anything. Which for Chris is, I gotta agree with whomever said it. As soon as it's Chris's turn, I know I'm going to enjoy the topics, but I know I don't stand a chance in hell of connecting.
I gave you a little clue in each segment.
I want to say something with the music because you're always the big music guy. And I want to say that somehow the music is connected between them. The only thing I can think of is that the premiere songs in some of the movies maybe were from across the pond because Milli Vanilli for Across the Pond, James Bond, British, and I believe
Breakfast Club.
Simple Minds. They were Swedish, I think. Yeah, it's the only thing I could come up with was that the music was from, Europe.
You talked a lot about enduring. So I'm like, all right, I'm listening. I'm trying to listen. I have one more thing I just want to say. I'm like, okay, pay attention. Maybe he's going to throw us a clue here. So those are the ones that I pay a particularly close attention to because you're adamant. I got to get this in. Maybe this will help. So those were always around enduring. And yes, Breakfast Club wasn't expected to endure. It wasn't expected to stand the test of time. And yet, wow, look, all these years later, literally celebrating we're coming up. Was it 84? So we've had 40-year reunion now, 40-year anniversary. It's more than endured.
Yeah.
James Bond, you mentioned how Sean Connery himself, we saw him we weren't even alive for him being James Bond, but he cemented the role in our brains and it continues even into today. And Milli Vanilli, who was actually dethroned, their stuff was taken away. Everything was, and yet here we are still talking about them all these years later. I know that's probably not it, but that's something.
That's actually a good one. And it's not it, but that is a good connection.
I was thinking of parodies too. James Bond has had, like you mentioned, Austin Powers. Mm-hmm. James Bond had parodies. The Breakfast Club had like Not Another Teen Movie. And we make fun of things like that. Milli Vanilli, I don't know how there would be
They were a parody.
They were a parody, I guess. I mean, that's the only other thing I got.
So, Shell, you're close with the music, and it actually is interesting that you thought about globally because Duran Duran, I think, is Australian, right? So they would have been, there would have been like music from other parts of the country. It is the music, but it's that each one of those had a number one song in the 80s, spawned a number one song. So the Breakfast Club, Don't You Forget About Me was number one. A View to a Kill from James Bond in 1986, 87 was a number one song from Duran Duran. And Milli Vanilli had Girl, You Know It's True, which was also number one in 1988 or 89. So that was the connection. All three spawned number one songs.
And we said them. I sang for you.
When I kept going back to the music, I talked about John Hughes and his how important music was to him. Yeah. Got as soon as somebody said A View to Kill with Duran Duran, I went right into all the music with James Bond, and of course Milli Vanilli goes without saying. So that was the connection. They all spawned number one songs in the 80s,
which is not easy.
Never would have gotten
That's a big deal.
And they should have because it's you and it's music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like John's thinking though, the endurance, the enduring legacy of all of them. Yeah. I like the idea that, there's that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they all, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think to your point, Chris, we may disagree a little on Milli Vanilli, and yet that discussion is not just being had between the two of us. There are documentaries, there are articles that are being written, there are influencers that are talking about it. That is being revisited over and over again. And it speaks to the two of them that, they endured. It's a shame only one of them got to see, it move on. But they were taken advantage of. I did a quick just dive in, and they just did what they were told. They didn't know any better. They just did what they did. Melinda says Gen X pop culture is weird. Gen X is all about pop culture, hence our show, more than I think any other generation. We live, breathe, and die pop culture.
Yeah. We had the greatest decade for pop culture in history, and it's not close. It's not close. All of the stories, the innovations, the inventions, and the music and the movies, and the things that we talk about today, 40 years later, that are still, you still turn on the TV and I've said this before, you're going to have like a Tide commercial with a New Order song. I mean, it's still there and it's not going away. And it's because we created, I say we, but our generation was interested in things that were different, things that were weird. And because of that, all of this music and movies were created to support who we were. So,
because giving everybody final thoughts.
I'm gonna have to get away from the music at some point. But I
the voice.
Yeah.
And if anybody recognizes the last name on our friend Scott there, for those watching this on YouTube, that would be Rochelle's esteemed husband.
Yeah.
Fan of Pussy Galore.
Yeah.
And I'll just leave that there.
If I gave him free reign over that chat right now, if I said, okay, permission, go, he'd have you were mentioning the female James Bond. He'd have a name for the male version of Pussy Galore in seconds. I'm telling you. So don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah, I loved it. It was great. I think we're going to see you transition away from music, unfortunately. And I don't want to, because we learn a lot from, Rochelle's like, well, you're the music guy. You are. And I've learned a lot just listening to you on these podcasts. I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate
it. And even if we know it's music, we still have to come up with, Chris. Don't stray away from what you know. We still have to figure out how the music of the three items, even if we already know straight up Chris is doing music again, we have to figure it out.
And I did look up, For Your Eyes only hit number 4, I think, on the charts. So James Bond almost spawned another 80s number 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's
Sheena Easton, great song.
And I think too, like we do talk a lot about the music in the 80s and how diverse it was in terms of what was popular and became popular. Unlike today, where you'll have a breakthrough, different type of music. You'll have I don't know. You'll have something. It'll all be like kind of the same kind of poppy, whatever it is today, and then something will break through, then it's gone. And back then, even these 3 songs, Don't You Forget About Me, A View to a Kill, and Girl, You Know It's True, are different, and they're different genres. And so I think that speaks to it. When I was looking at all the number 1 songs from the 80s, I was like, whoa, I wanted to do that. That was going to be the connection, but I'm like, where do I start?
Yeah, no, the diversity in music was incredible when we were growing up. Absolutely incredible. It absolutely spiked then.
Do we have a green light on that?
No, we do not have a green light on that.
No.
You lost me. I was worthless after that topic.
Melinda says Kenny Loggins was an 80s beast. Speaking of our music,
yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Lots of he was a music beast and a soundtrack beast.
Yeah.
Footloose, Top Gun. I mean, incredible.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I can't believe it's been an hour, 8 minutes, and 52 seconds.
That's not bad. That's only be 8 some minutes over. That's not bad at all.
And I would say that based on the moment we actually started, probably right on track.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good job, Chris.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Next week is
you.
Me.
Yeah.
All right. I've been waiting for this week for quite some time. I've had my picks picked for a while. So those of you in our live studio audience, everybody's picks are amazing. Shell does an incredible job. Chris, just chef's kiss. Don't miss next week. Bring a friend, bring somebody in, because it should be a lot of fun. And I can't wait to see their expressions, and I can't wait to see the chat next week, because It should be a lot of fun. And that's all I'll say about that.
I can't wait.
That's about all I got to say.
All right, guys.
That's about all I got to
see
say
you
about
next
that.
That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah.
I'll let our
I'm
outro
doing the bender
take
as
us
we
out.
leave.
I'll see you all later. Be cool, stay cool. And Chris, what else should they do?
Stay rad, everybody.
See ya.
See you guys.